this next panel that I want to introduce is super exciting. It's actually, most of them are from the Forum for Youth Investment team. So if I can have Mary Ellen Wiggins, Gerard Blue, and Kaylin Langsang with Content by Us. Mary and Gerard are both with the Forum for Youth Investment. And we're going to just go straight into our conversation here about this great idea that you all have to push for a White House for children and youth. So to start us a conversation, to some folks, they might not be aware of kind of what that means, right? So what precedent would this, first of all, why don't we talk a little bit about what that means, right? And why push for that? But also what precedent would this set in engaging young people via the White House administration in this form?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Marilyn. And this has been so amazing. I just have to say thank you to all the panelists and the poets and everybody who's already spoken. This has just been truly an awesome event. So why even have an office like this in the first place? Well, if you look at the federal government and you try to ask yourself, who's actually responsible for whether young people are thriving? That question doesn't really have an answer. Like, you have the president who is responsible for everything. And then after that, you have people who are responsible for housing or for education or for health or things that are really important, but they're just a piece of a person's life. There actually isn't anybody whose job it is to say, are young people thriving in our country? What does that even mean? And what does that even look like? So the proposal for having a White House Office for Children and Youth is to actually create a center of responsibility. So someone who is a little less busy than president and can actually focus on that as a topic, who can bring together federal agencies. So all of those heads of different agencies that are responsible for all of those different parts of life, to have a coherent conversation and decision-making space to say, how are we helping young people? And that's really important, one, for how government is organized, because when you look at the federal government, the executive branch, there are actually 24 major agencies and a whole bunch of little ones, and there are over 2 million federal employees who are civilians. So there are all these people doing a bunch of stuff. You gotta have a way to bring it together at the top. And then it's also really important for advocates, because right now, when people wanna talk about an issue, you have to figure out which agency covers your issue. And then you have to go knock on all those doors. And then once you get their attention, they don't necessarily have a way to work together on things like gun safety, on hunger, on mental health, things that no single agency owns. So it's really important to have a place in the White House that's really high level, that can create responsibility for the very important and distinct groups of children, adolescents, and young adults that have a concerted focus on all of them, and that can organize all of those different agencies to make sure that they're really working together and really listening. And I'll hand it over to Gerard to talk a little bit more about what kind of precedent that means for youth engagement and what that might do into the future.
So as Mary Ellen already eloquently stated, having youth and an office for children and youth will help to make sure that the youth voice is heard. We already talked to a couple of the youth panelists who educated us on how important it is to make sure that the youth voice on the ground is heard all the way up to the executive branch and the federal branch. So to make sure that someone is there and speaking on behalf of youth and their voice. One of the things that I've learned when I started working in the opportunity youth space is that tokenizing is a thing that's done by so many organizations, and youth are done with that. They want their voice to be heard and not just to be used, and be able to really change the scope of the work that's happening. So not only having individuals, like Mary Ellen said, who have all of these different jobs and working in all of these different agencies, we have youth actually helping them, informing them of what's the best route and what's the best policy and advocacy aspects they should be implementing.
Yeah, thank you for breaking that down very concisely, Mary Ellen and Gerard. And Gerard, actually, I want to build off of what you just said, because you are very much active in the opportunity youth space. And for those joining us who are not aware of that term, opportunity youth refers to young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who are not in school and not working. So a very important population of young people that we're trying to reconnect to education and employment pathways. So I know that you have been doing a lot of great work around the Reconnecting Youth campaign, which is under the Forum for Youth Investment, in pretty much engaging young people to have agency to speak on some of these things that for example, appropriations, that some people might not know what that means, but you all as a campaign are kind of doing a lot of the educational component to get young people very active in that. So can you talk a little bit about your work on that campaign and how it does align with the efforts of engaging young people at a higher level?
Yeah, so the Reconnect the Youth campaign focuses on federal appropriations, which is basically the money that the government provides to states and localities for different programs. We focus on opportunity youth programs in the realm of education, training, workforce, apprenticeship, national service, and making sure that they get the most money as possible to reconnect the disconnected youth. As Marlene explained, those individuals who are not in school or not in work. And it can be for several reasons, criminal justice issues, family issues with finances, work stability, homelessness, all of these aspects that create a disconnected youth. We actually work with a lot of the different programs on this call, and we kind of round them up together in order to have those youth tell their story to Congress. We work directly with members of Congress to tell them why it's necessary to increase the funding for those federal appropriations. And we utilize youth from those localities. So they get a chance to say what they're doing, why it's important, why Job Corps was important to them, why their community program that got them back into high school was important to them, in order to convince them that this is necessary and a need. The Reconnect the Youth campaign is expanding and utilizing all of the different aspects and programs that we work with to really work on those policy issues that will also stop disconnecting youth so that the appropriations aspect can really go to those who are in need.
Thank you, Gerard, for breaking that down so concisely as well. And I just shared a link to Opportunity Youth United, which is one of our partners for this event, an amazing group of young people. Shout out. Kim is a part of OYU. There's a lot of folks on here, and just want to give a shout out to them because they're leading a lot on some of these efforts that Gerard has just mentioned. But to continue on this conversation, aside from trying to create something, like you said, Mary Ellen, that has accountability, I think that at these higher levels, we're still struggling at just even getting youth voices, just stories, right? So I want to bring in Kaylin, who is with Content by Us, to talk a little bit more about why it's so important to create this organization and really how you have worked with the power of storytelling with youth and young adults on, a different range of not only policy, but amplifying the work that they're doing and just overall, just them being amazing.
Yeah, so basically, for anyone who doesn't know, Content by Us is this campaign that we're doing that's kind of at its core just like elevating underrepresented youth voices, and especially like underrepresented youth artists. I know that to name a few, Matthew and Natalia, the poets who performed today, we actually got them from our creators network and gave them this opportunity to like perform and like get their stuff out there because they're like such awesome poets. But it's just like sometimes it's just a matter of having a platform to, like get your ideas out there and express yourself in your own perspective. And I think that what we're hearing a lot of in this panel generally is that storytelling is like such a huge part of like any advocacy work. Like it's at the heart of like, I think like literally everyone's work here is like storytelling. And I think at Content by Us and like the future we need, which is like also giving like folks a platform like this to just like get their stuff out there and like try to put our heads together to try to create solutions for all of these issues that we're facing. I think at the core of it is just like sustainable empowerment. Like, I think something we've also seen, especially like since it was an election year and like also with the Georgia runoffs, is that sometimes it's like a majority of people are only going to pay attention to an underrepresented group when they're suffering or when they're suffering in the fight for change. And it's just like, there's so much more to people than the ways that they suffer and the ways that they need to advocate for their own communities. And I think something that we want to highlight through the work that we're doing with Content by Us is literally just like elevating the voices of underrepresented creators who are doing the work on the ground and showing that, they're real, like 3-dimensional people that aren't like fighting all the time. Like something that I have like kind of like gained from my limited interactions with folks who like incorporate art into their activism is that, you know, advocating and fighting for change doesn't always need to be a painful struggle. Like you can still find ways to express all of the ways that, you know, you're thriving as a person, your community is like
Yeah.
thriving and finding light within itself. And I just think like that's honestly so powerful. Like as underrepresented young people, it's finding light and love and peace and joy in basically a nation that was designed to rob us of it is so important, and we should be celebrating that like with the importance that it holds all the time, not just when these communities are suffering or fighting. And yeah, that was a long spiel. Basically, that's the hard
No,
one.
that was so beautifully said, Kaylin. And you're hitting on a very important point, is that why do we have to highlight young people, like you said, when it's always some tragedy, right? Young people are always doing the work. This is not a 9-to-5 job. You know, a lot of the people on here, we work, nights, tears, sweat, like we're there because this work never ends. And it also touches on the reason that content by us is needed. Forum for Youth Investment, CLASP, all these other organizations, Opportunity United, is because at a thread of all of this, including what's being proposed for the White House of Children and Youth Office, is being able to contribute to a narrative that's not always toxic, that's not always based on these myths of young people always being portrayed on the negative light. Like there's so much more to us than these kind of stereotypes that they always want to give youth and young adults. And, even when it comes to, basic healthcare, for example, they think that because we're young, we're healthy. Like that's nowhere near the reality. Like we saw the numbers that Nia has shared with us with class and the reality of what young people are facing. So like you said, Kaylin, this all gets connected by sharing experiences and letting folks know that this is what young people need and want. And that is seen through the lobbying efforts, our Reconnecting Youth campaign, when they bring the young people to speak with members of Congress, obviously through this initiative that Mary Ellen is proposing for accountability, and then, Kaylin through the content producing of just getting the story out.